Ukrainians faced a grim start to 2023 as Sunday brought more Russian missile and drone attacks following a blistering New Year's Eve assault that killed at least 3 civilians across the country, authorities reported. Air raid sirens sounded in the capital shortly after midnight, followed by a barrage of missiles that interrupted the small celebrations residents held at home due to wartime curfews. Ukrainian officials alleged Moscow was deliberately targeting civilians along with critical infrastructure to create a climate of fear and destroy morale during the long winter months. Ukrainian forces in the air and on the ground shot down 45 Iranian-made explosive drones fired by Russia on Saturday night and before dawn Sunday, Zelensky said. Another strike at noon Sunday in the southern Zaporizhia region killed one person, according to the head of the regional military administration, Alexander Starik. But Kyiv was largely quiet, and people there on New Year's Day savored the snippets of peace. Multiple blasts rocked the capital and other areas of Ukraine on Saturday and through the night, wounding dozens. An AP photographer at the scene of an explosion in Kyiv saw a woman's body as her husband and son stood nearby. The strikes came 36 hours after widespread missile attacks Russia launched Thursday to damage energy infrastructure facilities. Saturday's unusually quick follow-up alarmed Ukrainian officials. Russia has carried out airstrikes on Ukrainian power and water supplies almost weekly since October, increasing the suffering of Ukrainians, while its ground forces struggle to hold ground and advance. When shells hit the children's hospital on Saturday night, surgeons were operating on a 13-year-old boy who was seriously wounded in a nearby village that evening, Kherson Governor Yaroslav Yanushevich said. The boy was transferred in serious condition to a hospital about 99 kilometers, 62 miles, away in Mykolaiv. While Russia's bombardments have left many Ukrainians without heating and electricity due to damage or controlled blackouts meant to preserve the remaining power supply, Ukraine's state-owned grid operator said Sunday there would be no restrictions on electricity use for one day. Meanwhile, NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg said the Western military alliance's 30 members need to ramp up arms production in the coming months both to maintain their own stockpiles and to keep supplying Ukraine with the weapons it needs to fend off Russia. It is a core responsibility for NATO to ensure that we have the stocks, the supplies, the weapons in place to ensure our own deterrence and defense, but also to be able to continue to provide support to Ukraine for the long haul, he said. The NATO chief said that while Russia has experienced battlefield setbacks and the fighting on the ground appears at a stalemate, Russia has shown no sign of giving up its overall goal of taking control over Ukraine, he said. He added that what Ukraine can achieve during negotiations to end the war will depend on the strength it shows on the battlefield. Last week, 10 months after Russia invaded his country, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky made an uncertain trip to Washington, D.C. to ask the U.S. for additional aid to finally end the conflict, which continues to stoke fears over environmental catastrophe in the wake of Russian attacks on Ukraine's nuclear power plants, as well as Russian threats over the use of nuclear weapons. Among other measures, Zelensky asked the U.S. to strengthen tariffs against Russia and render the war financially unsustainable. This would particularly affect areas of science and technology research where Russia has traditionally excelled, including physics, space exploration and climate science. But despite widespread Western support for Ukraine, it has proven difficult to disentangle U.S. scientific and technical collaborations with Russia. In many cases, resistance is coming from American scientists themselves, who argue that theirs and their colleagues' work is too important and urgent to disrupt, particularly surrounding climate change research as global warming accelerates. At the same time as Russia's scientific contributions have weakened, Ukraine has risen up as a leader in science in Eastern Europe and former Soviet states, particularly in areas of agriculture research and nuclear power. Since the beginning of the war, Russia has targeted Ukraine's scientific infrastructure. Ukraine's Institute of Physics and Technology in Kharkiv has been heavily damaged by Russian bombs. At Chernobyl and other nuclear power plants and research facilities, Russian troops have looted or destroyed millions of dollars worth of high-tech equipment and computers. At least 20 Ukrainian universities have been completely destroyed. To keep the war from sliding into a full destruction of Ukraine's higher education institutions and a potential nuclear disaster, the Biden administration has refrained from cutting scientific ties to Russia completely, a policy formulated by the Office of Science and Technology Policy, which advises the president on all matters related to science and technology. The 4-month gap between the invasion and policy announcement was likely a reflection of the nature of U.S. scientific enterprise and the decentralized research community in the U.S., the government official said. But Russian science is inextricably tied to the Russian government. The majority of the country's scientists are at least partially funded by the Russian government. The Biden administration imposed sanctions on Micron back in April, in a broad panel of sanctions against the aerospace, marine, and electronics sectors in Russia. Another round of sanctions in August targeted the Skolkovo Institute of Science and Technology, or Skoltech, founded in 2011 as a partnership with the Massachusetts Institutes of Technology to build out a Russian version of Silicon Valley. MIT announced it was shutting down the $3 billion partnership back in February, the day after the invasion. As of now, the total destruction in Ukraine is vast. Nearly 7,000 Ukrainian civilians have died since the start of the war, according to the UN. And Ukraine's scientific infrastructure and nuclear power plants continue to be under threat from Russian forces. While many American scientists are hoping the conflict ends soon and they can return to somewhat normalized relations with their Russian counterparts, others consider the war to be an inflection point that could, and should, encourage the West to rethink its scientific partnerships across the board. Russia attacked Ukraine on New Year's Eve with missiles, followed by a drone attack after midnight. According to the Kyiv City Military Administration, all 32 Russian aerial targets fired against Kyiv on January 1 were destroyed by the country's air defense. Kyiv Oblast Governor Alexei Kuleba reported that an undisclosed infrastructure facility was damaged, but there were no casualties. Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko said the missile debris fell in several districts in the capital. A car was damaged in the central Shevchenkivsky district, and debris also fell into Kyiv's Dniprovsky district, located on the left bank, authorities said. Across the country, the Air Force said it shot down 45 drones overnight. Russia's overnight missile attack came hours after it launched a coordinated strike that killed at least 2 civilians and wounded over 30 nationwide. Kyiv was the main target of Russia's afternoon strike, with 1 person killed and over 20 wounded. Russian troops shelled a children's hospital in the southern city of Kherson, killing 1 and wounding 1, according to Deputy Head of the President's Office Kirilo Tymoshenko. The northeastern Kharkiv Oblast also came under Russian artillery attack overnight, with a large-scale fire erupting at farmers' buildings, according to Governor Ola Syniehubov. No casualties were reported. On January 1, Russia's shelling killed 1 person and wounded 3 in Zaporizhia Oblast, Governor Alexander Starik said. Russia attacked Ukraine on December 31 and 30 minutes after midnight on January 1, targeting civilian infrastructure. Despite Moscow's claim about targeting military facilities, the missiles slammed into civilian areas in Kyiv and other regions across Ukraine on December 31. 2 hotels were hit in Kyiv, and scores of residential buildings were damaged. In the western city of Khmelnytsky, a 22-year-old girl died on January 1 in the hospital after being severely wounded during the New Year's Eve attack. The death toll climbed up to 2. The attack on Khmelnytsky wounded 8 people, the head of the emergency care department told public broadcaster Suspiln on January 1. 4 people remain in the hospital following the attack, he added. Khmelnytsky Oblast Governor Serhiy Hamalyi reported on December 31 that a military facility was among the sites hit in the city. Energy Minister Herman Halashchenko said on December 31 that significant damage was prevented by air defense and precautionary measures taken ahead of the strike. It was still a difficult day for energy workers, the state grid operator Ukrenergo said. Energy workers are doing everything possible to make the New Year's holiday with electricity, without restrictions, Ukrenergo said in a Telegram post. Fierce battles raged in Ukraine's east and south on New Year. Eastern Military Command spokesman Serhiy Cherevity said on January 1 that Russia apparently needs an operational pause due to its heavy losses near Bakhmut and Soledar in Donetsk Oblast, but it will likely continue assaults due to political reasons. Russia has massed its troops and equipment in a desperate bid to capture Bakhmut for 6 months. Both sides suffered heavy casualties in the battle of attrition and brutal trench warfare around Bakhmut. In an evening address, President Volodymyr Zelensky said that Russian troops are scared because they are losing, adding that drones, missiles, everything else will not help them. Ukraine's air defense forces destroyed 7 Russian Shahid-136 kamikaze drones over Mykolaiv Oblast late in the evening of December 31. Operational Command Pivden notes that all drones were shot down between 2200 hours and 2330. Meanwhile, Kim reported that the city of Mykolaiv was attacked with the use of 6 Iskander missiles on December 31. According to the authorities, Russian forces launched missiles on a residential area. Russian occupiers attacked Ukraine with Iranian-made Shahed 131/136 kamikaze drones on the night of December 31, 2022. All of the 32 Shahed UAVs launched have been shot down. Journalists fight on their own frontline. Support Ukrainska PRA. A serviceman collects fragments of missile in a crater left by a Russian strike in front of a residential building in the Ukrainian capital Kyiv on December 31. Ukraine was subjected to a cowardly barrage of fresh attacks by Russia in the early hours of New Year's Day, as Moscow saw in 2023 by attacking civilian targets. Ukraine's Air Force Command said it had destroyed 45 Iranian-made Shahed drones overnight, 32 of them on Sunday after midnight and 13 late on Saturday. That was on top of 31 missile attacks and 12 airstrikes that have hit the country in the past 24 hours. One drone used in an attack on Kyiv appeared to bear a handwritten note saying Happy New Year in Russian, in a photo posted on the Telegram messaging app by the capital's chief of police, Andriy Nebitov. Russia's defense ministry said it had targeted production, storage and launch sites of Ukrainian drones with long-range missiles on New Year's Eve. The late-night attack caused minimal damage in the capital's center, and preliminarily reports indicated there were no wounded or casualties, Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko said on social media. Attacks earlier on Saturday had hit residential buildings and a hotel in the capital, killing at least one person and injuring more than 20. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin signaled no let-up to his assault on Ukraine, in a grim and defiant New Year's speech that contrasted with Mr. Zelensky's hopeful message. Meanwhile, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg on Sunday said Western allies need to ramp up arms production in the coming months to ensure Ukraine is kept fully supplied in its war against Russia. Mr. Stoltenberg said the conflict is consuming an enormous amount of munitions, amid signs that President Vladimir Putin is digging in for the long haul. At the front line in Ukraine's eastern Donetsk province, troops toasted the new year. Soldier Pavlo Przychodzki, 27, played a song on guitar he had written at the front after 12 of his comrades were killed in a single night. Since October, Russia has launched mass missile and drone attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, casting cities into darkness and cold as winter sets in. Moscow says the strikes aim to reduce Ukraine's ability to fight. Kyiv says they have no military purpose and are intended to hurt civilians, a war crime. The Ministry of Defense of Russia has attacked Kyiv on the New Year's Eve, targeting the defense industry complex of Ukraine involved in the production of combat drones, the ministry reports. Deployment sites and launch sites of combat UAVs have also been allegedly targeted. The occupiers declared that the goals had been achieved, so it is alleged that Ukraine would not be able to attack Russia in the near future. On December 31, Russia launched an attack on Kyiv, damaging the capital's hotel, the Protasiv Yar Park and building of one of Kyiv's institutes. Later, on the night of December 31, January 1, Russian forces attacked Ukraine with Iranian-made Shahed kamikaze drones. 45 of them have been shut down. In Kyiv Oblast, all 32 Shahed UAVs launched by Russia have been downed by Ukrainian air defense systems. Yesterday's missile attack was characterized by the fact that missile launchers from the Caspian Sea were used. This was recorded for the first time since the full-scale invasion. The spokeswoman believes that it is now more difficult for the Russian army to deliver missile stocks to the Black Sea coast. This suggests that we are quite successful in keeping logistics under fire control, including on the east bank of the Dnipro River, she added. Russia carried out another mass missile attack on Ukraine on December 31. Explosions were heard in Kyiv, Zaporizhia, Khmelnytsky and Mykolaiv. There were casualties and wounded, and civilian objects were damaged. Earlier, Ukrainian intelligence reported that Russia had enough cruise missiles left for another 2 or 3 massive strikes on Ukraine. After 10 months of intense combat and a staggering expenditure of ammunition, the war in Ukraine heads into a cold and dark new year. For Ukraine and its president, Volodymyr Zelensky, it is a fight for survival. For Russia and Vladimir Putin, it's a military debacle. Kagan's Institute for the Study of War produces daily maps showing how much ground Russia has been forced to give up since its invasion stalled. Putin is trying to make up for it by unleashing drone and missile strikes against Ukraine's cities. Kagan said, Putin is looking for ways to break Ukraine's will to continue the fight, and most importantly, I think, he's focused on trying to break Western support for Ukraine. On December 21, the Biden administration put on a Christmas pageant of support for Zelensky during a whirlwind visit to the nation's capital. The embodiment of his country's fighting spirit, Zelensky thanked the U.S. for the $22 billion in weapons it has already committed, and made clear he will be asking for more. Ukraine is heading into the dead of winter under a continuing barrage of Russian drone and missile strikes. Kagan thinks Ukraine can turn the weapon of winter against the Russians. Right now, the Ukrainians have a window of opportunity, he said. This winter, especially as the ground freezes, if we provide them with the systems they need, the Russian army is still disorganized and generally reeling, and the Ukrainians have an opportunity to regain a lot of territory. Russian drones have targeted infrastructure in Ukraine's capital and surrounding areas, damaging energy facilities and causing some power outages, officials say, as Russia extends its bombardment into the second day of 2023. Ukrainian forces shot down 45 Iranian-made Shahid drones fired by Russia on the first night of the year, President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Sunday, praising Ukrainians for showing gratitude to the troops and one another. But in a stern New Year's speech, Russian President Vladimir Putin signaled no let-up in his assault on Ukraine. By 3 a.m. on Monday, Ukraine's air defense systems destroyed 20 air objects above Kyiv, its military administration said. Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko said the strikes had knocked out some power and heating. Earlier, he said one person was wounded by debris from a destroyed drone that hit a road and damaged a building in a northeastern district of the capital. Kyiv's police chief, Andriy Nebitov, posted a photo on the Telegram app, showing what was described as a piece of a drone used in an attack on the capital, with a handwritten sign on it in Russian reading, Happy New Year. Russia has flattened Ukrainian cities and killed thousands of civilians since Putin ordered his invasion in February, saying Ukraine was an artificial state whose pro-Western outlook threatened Russia's security. Ukraine has fought back with Western military support, driving Russian forces from more than half the territory they seized. In recent weeks, the front lines have been largely static, with thousands of soldiers dying in intense warfare. Russia says its aerial strikes aim to reduce Ukraine's ability to fight. Kyiv says they have no military purpose and are intended to hurt civilians, a war crime. Ukraine's Ministry for Reintegration of Temporarily Occupied Territories reported on January 1 that over the past year, Ukraine managed to return 1,464 service people and 132 civilians from Russian captivity. The latest exchange of prisoners took place on December 31, when 140 Ukrainian POWs were freed from captivity. However, about 3,400 Ukrainian soldiers are still in Russian captivity, and another 15,000 are considered missing, according to Alyona Verbitska, the president's commissioner for the rights of defenders of Ukraine. A fresh aerial strike targeted Kyiv in the early hours of Monday, after a New Year's Day marked by dozens of Russian assaults that killed at least 4 people in the capital and other cities. The Ukrainian capital and other cities came under fire from missiles and Iranian-made drones on Saturday, killing 3 people, and a new attack Sunday killed 1 in the southern region of Zaporizhia. The capital was once again rocked by an air raid on Monday morning, with the city's military administration ordering residents just after 1 a.m. local time, 23 o'clock GMT, to retreat to bomb shelters. Mayor Vitaly Klitschko reported an explosion in Kyiv's northeastern Desnyansky district and said emergency services had been dispatched. From the New Year's attacks, local governors and officials reported 1 death each in Orikhiv in the Zaporizhia region, in the capital Kyiv, in the southern region of Kherson and in the western city of Khmelnytsky. Then the Russian army struck the hospital where the boy was lying in intensive care, smashing the windows in the ward. The Russian onslaught damaged the Kherson hospital and also left the city and the surrounding settlements without electricity. Russian forces in November withdrew from Kherson, the only regional capital held by Moscow, but have continued to batter the city. The Ukrainian Air Force said 45 Iranian-made drones had been destroyed during the night between Saturday and Sunday. 13 were shot down at the end of 2022 and another 32 after midnight. Kyiv Police Chief Andriy Nebitov released a picture of the wreckage of a downed drone that featured the words, Happy New Year, in Russian. In the eastern region of Donetsk, pro-Russian officials said Ukrainian shelling had killed a civilian in the town of Yasenovida. After a series of military defeats, Russia in October began targeting Ukraine's infrastructure, leaving millions in the cold and dark. But in France, the Archbishop of Marseille, Jean-Marc Avellini, used a New Year's Day address to attack the frightening cynicism of Russia's campaign in Ukraine. Russia's defense ministry said a strike hit sites involved in the production, storage and deployment of drones. Russian forces on Thursday shot down a drone near Engels, a base for Russia's strategic aircraft, located hundreds of kilometers from Ukraine's border. Russia said on Monday it had downed another drone over Engels airfield and that falling debris killed 3 people. In early December, Moscow said Ukraine's Soviet-made drones had attacked that base and another in the Ryazan region, killing 3 people.